The Black Sea has always been a place of mystery, its waters deep and dark, hiding more than just sunken ships. I was 24 when my uncle invited me on a fishing trip off the coast of Varna, Bulgaria. He had an old trawler, rusty but dependable, and he swore the best catches were always near the drop-off where the sea floor fell away into terrifying depths. The first night out, I couldn't sleep, so I stepped onto the deck. The waves slapped against the hull, and the air smelled of salt and rust. I stared into the water, pitch black under the crescent moon, and I swore I saw something move just beneath the surface, too big to be a fish, too quick to be a drifting log. When I blinked, it was gone, but the feeling stayed with me, something was watching. By dawn, we were miles from shore. My uncle hummed while tossing nets over the side, but I noticed his eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept either. "This sea isn't like others," he muttered while pulling ropes taut. "They say the old ones live down there, older than men, older than time." He gave a tired laugh, but his words carried weight. By noon, the nets caught nothing. The sea was eerily still, as if life itself had fled. Then, just after midday, a dull thud shook the boat. I rushed to the side, expecting driftwood or debris, but the water boiled with bubbles. Something pressed against the hull from below, hard enough that the entire trawler tilted slightly. My uncle froze, his face pale, and whispered, "Don't look into the water." But curiosity overpowered fear. I leaned over the railing and peered down. For a split second, I saw an enormous eye, yellow, with a slit pupil, glowing faintly in the dark water before vanishing into the depths. That night, the sea grew restless. The waves weren't large, but they carried a strange rhythm, almost like breathing. I tried to laugh it off, but every time the trawler swayed, I felt that something massive moved just beneath us, circling. Around midnight, I heard scraping sounds along the hull, long and drawn out, as though claws were testing the metal. My uncle didn't move from his cot. He just muttered prayers under his breath, clutching an old wooden cross. I lay awake, heart pounding, realizing I'd stepped into something far more sinister than a simple fishing trip. By morning, I wasn't sure if we'd still be afloat, or if whatever lurked below was only waiting for us to let our guard down. The second day on the Black Sea began with an unsettling silence. The air was heavy, the water so still it looked like black glass stretching endlessly in every direction. Even the gulls, which had followed us out from the coast, were gone. My uncle's hands shook as he lit a cigarette, and he barely spoke. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was, something unnatural was down there. Around noon, while we hauled up an empty net yet again, he finally said, "We're leaving tomorrow. No fish is worth this." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. That night, everything escalated. Just after sunset, the sea changed. The waves grew jagged, not like a normal storm but more erratic, as though something massive thrashed below. The old trawler groaned with every swell, the wooden beams creaking as if they might snap. I grabbed the railing to steady myself, and that's when I noticed them, shapes beneath the waves, enormous shadows moving against the moonlight's reflection. At first, I thought they were whales, but the way they twisted and circled the boat didn't look natural. They were too fast, too deliberate, like predators toying with prey. My uncle pulled me back, his face pale. "Don't let them know you see," he hissed. But how could I not? The shadows darted closer, sometimes brushing the underside of the boat with enough force to rattle the deck. Around midnight, everything stopped. The sea fell silent again, but it wasn't peaceful, just wrong. Then the smell hit us. It was thick, rancid, like rotting fish mixed with something metallic. I gagged, covering my nose, and that's when we heard it, a low moan rising from the depths, so deep it vibrated through the hull. My uncle dropped to his knees, whispering prayers I didn't recognize, and for the first time in my life, I saw terror hollow out his eyes. The sound grew louder until it felt like the whole ocean was alive, crying out from below. Then, without warning, the boat jerked violently to one side, sending me sprawling across the deck. I scrambled up, and my blood turned cold. Rising from the water on the starboard side was something massive, far larger than the trawler itself. I couldn't see its whole body, only parts illuminated by the moon, wet, glistening skin that shimmered like oil, covered in strange barnacle-like growths. Its surface pulsed, almost as if it were breathing. And then, from the water, a limb emerged. It wasn't a tentacle, not exactly, but something like it, long, ridged, covered in barbs. It reached across the surface, feeling its way along the side of the boat, the metal shrieking as it scraped. My uncle shouted at me to get below deck, but I was frozen in place, eyes locked on the thing. That's when I saw it again, the eye. Enormous, yellow, slit-pupiled, watching us with an intelligence that felt ancient and hateful. The limb curled around the railing, pulling with such force the entire boat tilted toward the water. I stumbled, grabbing onto a mast, while my uncle fired a flare gun straight into the night sky. The red light illuminated the creature for only a second, but what I saw will haunt me forever. Its head, or what resembled one, was broad and ridged, lined with rows of something like gills that opened and closed with a wet sucking sound. It wasn't fish, it wasn't squid, it wasn't anything I'd ever seen. The flare must have startled it, because the limb suddenly recoiled, splashing back into the water with a deafening crash. The waves rocked the boat violently, nearly capsizing us, but then the sea went still once more. We didn't sleep that night. My uncle sat in silence, the flare gun clutched in his lap, his cigarette burning to ash without him noticing. I couldn't stop shaking. I wanted to believe we'd scared it off, that it had gone back into whatever abyss it crawled from, but deep down I knew better. As the hours dragged on, I could still feel its presence circling below us, patient, waiting. The sun eventually crept over the horizon, but the light didn't bring relief. If anything, the endless black water looked even more sinister under daylight. My uncle finally muttered, "We're turning back now. Pray we make it." His words weren't just fear, they were resignation. Whatever was down there wasn't finished with us yet. The third morning should have brought relief, but instead it carried a strange unease, like the sea itself was holding its breath. My uncle started the trawler's engine without a word. He didn't even bother casting the nets. His hands shook as he steered us toward the faint outline of the shore, which was still just a blur in the distance. I clung to the hope that by evening we'd see land clearly, that the nightmare would end once our feet touched sand. But the Black Sea wasn't about to let us go so easily. By mid-morning, the engine began to sputter. My uncle cursed under his breath, fiddling with the controls. He was an experienced seaman, he could fix almost anything on that boat, but the sound wasn't mechanical. It was more like something clogging the system, choking it from the outside. He cut the engine and leaned over the side to check the propeller. His face went pale. "Seaweed," he muttered, but his tone betrayed him. I peered over and froze. It wasn't seaweed. Tangled around the propeller shaft was a mass of slick, black tendrils. They pulsed faintly, tightening as if alive, wrapping tighter the longer we looked. My uncle grabbed a knife and tried to cut them free, but the moment the blade touched one, the tendril snapped back into the water, releasing a cloud of ink so dark it swallowed the sunlight. For a few seconds, the sea looked bottomless, like we were suspended in a void. The trawler rocked violently as if something slammed into the hull from below. I stumbled, hitting the deck hard enough to bruise. My uncle grabbed me by the arm, dragging me upright. "Get below," he shouted, but I couldn't move. The sound was back, the low, guttural moan, rising from the depths, vibrating through the air and into my bones. This time it was closer, louder, angry. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just noise, it was inside my head, pulsing with meaning I couldn't understand, but the intent was clear: you don't belong here. Suddenly, the trawler lurched forward, not from the engine, but as if it were being pushed. I stumbled toward the bow, clutching the railing, and what I saw nearly made my heart stop. Rising out of the water, a shape loomed just beneath the surface. Its size was impossible to comprehend, it stretched longer than our entire vessel, its body covered in scales that reflected the faint light like shards of obsidian. As it moved, the water boiled, and the waves surged high enough to slap across the deck. For a split second, the massive form broke the surface, and I saw rows of jagged fins, spines that jutted like broken glass, and a gaping maw lined with teeth that spiraled inward, endless and hungry. My uncle fired the flare gun again, but this time the creature didn't retreat. Instead, it bellowed, the sound splitting the sky like thunder. The flare's red light illuminated its face just long enough for me to see its mouth opening wider, impossibly wide. Water surged into its throat, pulling the boat with it like a toy circling a drain. My uncle screamed for me to hold on, but the deck was slick, and I slipped, sliding toward the edge. At the last second, he caught my wrist and yanked me back as a wave crashed over us, nearly sweeping us both into the abyss. The trawler groaned under the strain, its beams cracking. My uncle, drenched and shaking, shouted over the roar, "We won't make shore. Not unless we outlast it." He jammed the throttle forward, forcing the engine to roar despite its protests. Somehow, miraculously, the boat surged ahead, breaking free from the pull. But the creature followed. I saw its shadow beneath us, impossibly vast, gliding effortlessly through the water. Every few seconds, it rammed the underside of the boat, sending shudders through the hull. Hours passed like this, us fleeing, it pursuing. The sun arced overhead, but instead of comfort, the daylight made the endless expanse of sea feel even more hopeless. There was no one around us, no ships, no planes, just us and the thing from the deep. Exhaustion set in, but fear kept me alert. Each time I thought it had given up, the shadow would reappear, circling, waiting. My uncle's knuckles were white on the wheel, his lips cracked from the salt spray, but he didn't stop. His determination was the only thing keeping me from collapsing into despair. As twilight fell, the sea calmed again. The waves gentled, the air stilled, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed peaceful. My uncle exhaled, his shoulders slumping, but I couldn't share his relief. I knew it was still there. I could feel it in my chest, like an echo of its voice still thrumming in my bones. And when I leaned over the railing one last time before nightfall, I saw it. Just beneath the surface, that same yellow eye, unblinking, staring back at me. It wasn't chasing us anymore. It was waiting. Night on the fourth day swallowed the sea in blackness so complete it felt like we were adrift in space. The horizon vanished, the stars obscured by thick clouds that hung heavy above us. The only sound was the gentle slap of waves against the hull, yet beneath that rhythm was something else, an undertone, a slow, steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. My uncle sat at the wheel, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. He hadn't spoken in hours. I could tell his strength was fading, but neither of us dared stop. Sleep meant vulnerability, and out here, vulnerability meant death. Around midnight, the silence shattered. The trawler jolted so violently that I was thrown across the deck, crashing into a coil of rope. My uncle swore, spinning the wheel, but it was useless. The sea erupted around us, waves rising in walls that towered over the boat. Lightning crackled in the distance, illuminating the monstrous silhouette just below the surface. It was following us again, circling with predatory patience, driving the sea into chaos. Then came the sound, the guttural moan, but this time twisted, higher, almost shrieking. It pierced through my skull, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. Water began pouring over the deck as the waves grew violent. I scrambled to the side, clutching a railing slick with salt and spray, and through the white froth of the crashing waves, I saw it. A limb, longer than the trawler itself, rose from the water, ending not in a tentacle or claw but something worse. It split into a fan of barbed ridges, each quivering, dripping with slime. It slammed against the deck, tearing through wood like paper, leaving gaping holes that flooded instantly. The boat groaned, the timbers snapping, and I screamed, certain we were finished. My uncle grabbed the hatchet he kept near the wheel and charged at the thing, hacking wildly. His blade clanged uselessly against the barbed ridges, but it was enough to make the creature pull back with a furious bellow. The water surged, slamming us side to side. Every second felt like the trawler would capsize. Then, without warning, the sea went still again. Not calm, dead still. The waves fell flat, the storm clouds hung motionless, and for a moment, there was no sound at all. I collapsed onto the deck, soaked and shivering, gasping for breath. My uncle leaned against the wheel, staring into the darkness with haunted eyes. "It's not trying to sink us," he rasped. "It's trying to drive us mad." His words chilled me more than the cold night air. The silence stretched on unnaturally. Even the boat seemed afraid to creak. Then, from the water beside us, a voice whispered. It wasn't human, but it was close enough that my blood turned to ice. It was a garbled sound, like words spoken through water, layered and broken, yet somehow I understood the intent: "Come below." I froze, looking at my uncle. He shook his head violently, pressing his hands over his ears. But the voice persisted, circling the boat, calling from every side. "Come below. Come below." I stumbled back, clutching my head, the words echoing inside me. I fought against them, but part of me, some dark, primal part, wanted to obey, wanted to dive into the water and follow the voice down into the abyss. My legs carried me toward the edge before my uncle grabbed me, slamming me against the mast. His eyes were wide with fear and fury. "Don't listen," he shouted, shaking me until the trance broke. My heart hammered, and I realized how close I'd come to throwing myself overboard. The voice stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. We stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting for the next strike. Then came a sound I'll never forget: nails on metal. Long, slow scrapes across the hull, circling the boat, closer and closer. The entire trawler trembled as though something was crawling along its underside. My uncle pointed toward the hatch. "Below deck. Now." We stumbled down into the cramped cabin, slamming the hatch shut. The smell of damp wood and oil filled the air as the trawler creaked around us. Then the sounds grew louder: knocking, scratching, the groan of metal bending. Something was pressing against the hull, denting it inward. The lantern hanging from the ceiling swung wildly as the boat shook. I pressed my back against the wall, covering my ears, praying the wood would hold. My uncle loaded the flare gun again, his hands trembling. Then, just above us, came a hollow thunk. Another. Then another. Footsteps. Something heavy was walking across the deck. My blood ran cold. Whatever lived in that abyss had climbed onto the boat. We stayed frozen in the dark, listening to its weight shift across the planks, hearing its claws drag as it moved. The cabin walls shook with each step. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming, while my uncle raised the flare gun at the ceiling, ready for whatever came next. The sound of those footsteps above us was unbearable, slow, deliberate, each one heavy enough to make the beams creak. My uncle's knuckles were white around the flare gun, his breath ragged in the thick air of the cabin. I could feel the weight of the thing above pressing down, as though the boat itself was groaning under its presence. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The tiny cabin felt like a coffin. Then came the dragging noise, like claws scraping wood, moving toward the hatch. We stared at the hatch as the metal latch rattled. My uncle raised the flare gun, whispering something I couldn't hear, and for a terrible moment, I thought the creature would force its way inside. But then it stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give us away. Minutes passed like hours. Just when I began to hope it had left, there was a loud splash, followed by a groaning sound as the boat rocked violently. It had gone back into the sea. Relief washed over me, but it was poisoned with dread. It wasn't gone. It was playing with us. My uncle lowered the flare gun, his hands trembling. "It won't let us go," he muttered, and for the first time, his voice cracked. He had always been strong, unshakable, but now he looked like a man broken by something too big to fight. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't. The truth was, I felt the same. Hours crawled by. We stayed below deck, listening. Sometimes there were faint knocks on the hull, sometimes whispers that seeped through the walls, but mostly there was silence. It was almost worse, the waiting. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of water. Cold, black water creeping across the floor of the cabin. I shot up, heart racing, and shook my uncle awake. A seam along the hull had split, seawater pouring in. We scrambled to patch it, stuffing rags, hammering boards, but no matter what we did, more cracks spread. The boat was bleeding out. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a pale hand pressed against the glass of the tiny porthole. Human in shape, but impossibly long, with webbed fingers that ended in sharp tips. I screamed, stumbling back, and my uncle fired the flare gun point blank. The glass shattered, flames streaking into the night. The scream that followed wasn't human, it was deep and guttural, shaking the boat to its bones. The hand vanished, and water exploded through the broken porthole. We were sinking. Fast. My uncle grabbed me, shoving me toward the ladder. "Get to the deck," he yelled. We burst into the night air, the deck slick and broken, the boat groaning as water rushed in below. The sea was too calm, too still. I looked around wildly, but the creature wasn't visible, just the endless black water, stretching in every direction. My uncle grabbed the emergency raft, struggling to release it, but before he could, the boat lurched violently, tilting as something massive rose beneath us. The water bulged, and from it emerged that terrible eye again, closer than ever, enormous, unblinking, filled with malice. The surface broke around it, revealing a maw lined with teeth that spiraled into darkness. The trawler cracked, splitting down the middle as the thing's body coiled around it.